I'm Deborah Rose. I work in multi-species ethnography, and I work on extinction studies. For many of us who were taught to believe that we're invulnerable, now find out that in fact we're not. And that, basically, we're wrecking things in such a savage way that it gives us, actually, I think it's giving us a kind of profile of at least the powerful humans who are running the show, a profile that is evil, unbelievably ugly and actually evil. Do we just party on, as Kate said yesterday? Not that she was advocating that, but as remarking on that as one possible way to respond to the Anthropocene. Or do we take this as a moment actually to enhance our capacity for love, for care, for keeping faith with Earth, keeping faith with life, being with others even though we can't stop humans from doing a lot of things that humans should be stopped from doing. We can't turn our backs, we can decide we can or we can't turn our backs on that. So we still are part of the story, and we still do need to choose how we're going to be in that story.
I'd like to start first by thanking Ian. This is a really important thing that's happening, and it's beautifully conceived and beautifully organized, and I'm very glad to be part of it. I also want to start by acknowledging Gadigal country and Gadigal people, past, present, and future. So I want to say at the outset that I'm not thinking of country as a thing or caring for country as a policy. I'm here because caring for country is a conversation we need to be having. It's a conversation for the Anthropocene. It's desperately urgent. My purpose today then is to try to make sure that the conversation is deeply challenging. So I want to acknowledge from the start that there are real difficulties with conversations that involve histories and ontologies across cultures and across species as well, because the issues that confront us aren't only about us humans. I also want to mention the slippery word "we" that other people have mentioned and that I'm using all over the place. I took a bit of heart when I recalled that the Latin roots of the term discourse mean sort of running to and fro or running all over the place. So I want to say that I'm using my first person plural discursively. In my book, Dingo Makes Us Human, I wrote, "Anthropology is, or so one hopes, a thorn, a discomfort to those who like their words and ideas neatly packaged." This caring for country conversation should be like that. It should be a disruptor. And in fact, I hope it is quite a large thorn and that I can lodge it in a few sensitive places, which is what I'm aiming for. And actually, let's acknowledge that this is something that we in the humanities often do quite well. We shake things up, we offer critique, we make things difficult. Sometimes we drive our more stodgy colleagues bonkers, so be it. As people working in the environmental humanities, one of our tasks, not the only one, but one, is to make things difficult in relation to environmental thought and practice. And I suspect that we have not yet learned to be anywhere near difficult enough. And the caring for country conversation should and will challenge us to be more difficult. So country is not a thing, it's a subject. Country has quietly been moving into, or the term country has been quietly been moving into mainstream English. The fact that the phrase caring for country doesn't use a definite article is indicative of some of the shifts that seem to be taking place at this time. I'll just say a few words about country, but we have a whole day of Aboriginal people who are going to be speaking from country, and they are the ones to do that. Well, country is multidimensional. It consists of people, animals, plants, dreamings, the dead and the yet to be born, the underground, earth, soils, minerals, and waters, surface water and air. There's sea country and land country, and sky country too. Country has origins and a future. Country exists in and through time. So country can't be defined in any exhaustive sense. Like a person, for example, life and will are ongoing. We don't know exactly what will happen next, what country will do next, what life will do next. Country has its own story, its people are part of it, and the story isn't over. Well, care also isn't a thing, it's a practice, and as long as it's adaptive and flexible, the story of care is never settled either. In short, there are many parameters to both caring and country, and that means there are many ways into this conversation we need to be having. So I'm going to explore several paths, focusing on those that seem to me to offer particularly interesting difficulties. I'm sure there are many more, and hopefully over the course of the day we'll talk about some more. First, though, I want to say just a few words about how the phrase caring for country is being appropriated and misused. As the term country has moved into mainstream English, it has frequently been domesticated, defanged, and declawed in the sense of neutralizing its capacity to provoke genuine challenge. It mimics Aboriginal culture and often, all too often, goes straight into caricature. Just one example of what I mean would be the government's NRM, Natural Resource Management website, where we read, caring for our country, and note the possessive pronoun our, caring for our country is one way the Australian government funds environmental management of our natural resources by supporting communities, farmers, and other land managers to protect Australia's natural environment and sustainability. Funding Indigenous projects is an important part of caring for our country. It contributes to the Council of Australian Government's commitment to closing the gap. So you will have heard the nature-culture binary, the slip from country to nation, the managerial paradigm, and the use of a program of care to achieve national stats targets for Aboriginal people. It's not too great a leap to suspect that Aboriginal people are being treated as a problem to be managed in this program. The program also includes the National Landcare program. I don't know exactly, haven't been able to find out exactly where the term Landcare, where it has its origins. I'm going to got an account of it, but I think it is influenced by Aboriginal caring for country, but I haven't actually been able to find anybody who says that. But a few days ago, while I was working on another project, I happened across a publication from Landcare Victoria called Landcare Notes 1080 Poison Baits for Pest Animal Control. It discusses the merits of using 1080, and it discusses the various lethal doses. And I just want to assure you that spreading poison, which is to say spreading suffering and death all over the land, is more than a failure to understand caring for country. I think it is a heartbreaking leap from mimicry to mockery by way of managerial killing. And I think it wants us to ask and to query this ongoing determination to inhabit the land through slaughter. That's one of the difficult conversations we need to have. Okay, paths into conversation. My first path starts with the Ngariñman term bunyu. There isn't a single English translation for this term. Bunyu is all that is good. Bunyu means healthy, good, beautiful, knowledgeable, happy, responsible, clean, and within the law in the sense of living properly. So it's a recursive mode of being and becoming. I think of bunyu as a fullness of life, managing one's own health, promoting that of others, promoting health of country. Animals, of course, are included within bunyu. Animals can be bunyu or not bunyu. Country, too, is included within the concept of bunyu. Country can be healthy or sick, clean or uncared for. Country can be bunyu, or country can be broken down, wongut. So I'm starting with a word or concept that I've been taught directly, but similar concepts of goodness, health, and law are pertinent in many parts of Australia. Every country is different, but they are certainly not disconnected. The Aboriginal philosopher Mary Graham has written a great article entitled Some Thoughts on the Philosophical Underpinnings of Aboriginal Worldviews. And in this article, she identifies two major precepts, each one of which is deceptively simple and extremely complex. First, she says, the land is the law. The land is the law. And the second, you are not alone in the world. I hope you can read this. I put up, I think this is such a cheeky little poster. I'm planting trees. What are you doing for the environment? He also needs to learn that the environment is a bit passé, but I'm sure he'll find a way to rephrase the poster. Well, each of Mary's precepts is incredibly challenging for contemporary Western thought. Stephen Mukey has offered the absolute best meta-statement about Aboriginal philosophy, and he states it with his characteristic humility. If I were to risk a generalization, I would say that Aboriginal philosophies as ways of life are all about keeping things alive in their place. Okay, land is the law, you're not alone, keep things alive in their place. So let's see how we can make this more difficult, as if it weren't already. My next path goes by way of law, Aboriginal law. And I think law in Aboriginal usage is another great disruptor. I'm drawing here on the work of Amblin and Blaise Kamolina. Hope I'm pronouncing that properly. I sort of read that with an Aranda orthography, but that may be quite wrong. Anyhow, their article is called Learning to Read the Signs, Law in an Indigenous Reality. They are from the Pilbara. Mary Graham's a Maori woman from up around Brisbane somewhere. Like Mary, they emphasize relationships and relationality. They're interested in contrast with mainstream Western thought and the Aboriginal mode of law, in which relationships come first, okay? Relationships come first. Learning and responsible action are shaped from within relationships. So the Kamolina siblings tell us that law is part of all life, and there's nothing inanimate in country. In their beautiful words, law flows from the living hearts of Aboriginal countries, and in this sense, it's location-specific. They discuss the Noongar lawyer Irene Watson, who writes about the state of being in exile from the law. She attributes most of the disasters and crises the world is facing today to the fact that the greater part of humanity is living in exile from the law. And actually, I think this is putting it rather kindly. The majority of us, let's be clear, are probably outlaws, willingly or not so willingly, and for many of us, not at all willingly. We're participants in this great destruction. We are not working with the law that flows from the land. Our conversation about caring for country is one of the ways we can start to transform an outlaw condition. But what does it mean to be on the inside of country and on the inside of the law? This path starts with a story. About 10 or 12 years ago, I forget exactly, but around the time of the publication of my book, Country of the Heart, and my co-author, Margie Day, and I had the glorious opportunity of going to Virginia to attend the Virginia Festival of the Book, and we presented there, and we did a little trip up the East Coast, and we stopped at various places and gave lectures and slideshows and stuff. And we did a radio interview at a place in Boston somewhere, and the guy who was doing the interview had never met an Aboriginal person before, never really known anything about country or any of this kind of stuff before. He was absolutely out of his depth. And he kept asking her questions that presupposed a managerial paradigm, that presupposed her outside her country, and she couldn't even answer the questions because they were so wrong to begin with. And she finally lost her cool, as Margie usually does. She was being recorded, so she didn't do her usual really scurrilous talk, but she lost her cool, and she said, look, it's not like that for us. She said, we are part of the flora and fauna of our country. And she had a wry look on her face as she said this. And I expect I did too, because both of us couldn't help but think of the awful history of colonization, during which, for generations, Aboriginal people were not counted as citizens or subjects, but rather were classed outside the human sphere of culture, in an extremely denigratory and perilous place to be. Well, this is how these Western binaries work. There's the valued side of the binary, culture, let us say, and it's follows inevitably, inexorably, that the other side of the binary is the disvalued side. When you take away the valued side, the default position is disvalue. That's why these are binaries and not complementary differences. There's nothing really complementary in this. Nevertheless, to be on the inside of country, on the inside of law, is in one sense to be part of the flora and fauna. It's to be, let us say, the human part. Of course, flora and fauna are all part of country and are part of networks of relationships, and these relationships have content, and they are networks of kinship. So that, as Paul Gordon, an elder from out around Burke, said of an endangered species that is his totemic kin, pattymellon, he said, they're not just flora and fauna, they're family. They're not just flora and fauna, they're family. And this slide is a reminder of inhabitation through slaughter. And what's being killed here is family. so that the nature-culture binary topples, and with it topples human exceptionalism, and with it topples the potentially denigratory category of non-human, because country is all about kinship. To live in goodness, to live within the law, to live a life that is bunyu, is to live within relations of kinship, and this is not a metaphor. My next path follows ideas about relational responsibility. The screen here. Witness. Okay. Here I'm drawing on my work with Aboriginal claims to land. I worked on about 18 land claims under the Aboriginal Land Rights Act in the Northern Territory. And one of the things that became clear early on in the land rights process was that if Aboriginal traditional owners were required to give their evidence whilst sitting in a community hall or someplace in town that is not out on country, they were monumentally disadvantaged. And the court actually, the land commissioners, developed a set of protocols, we can say the court, developed a set of protocols that actually took the court out bush. So that, and they did this not in any complicated way, but in the interests of natural justice, that Aboriginal people should have the right to give their evidence in a way that enabled them fully and fairly to offer that evidence, and for that evidence fully and fairly to be heard. So, so off we went out into bush. So there's the court hearing evidence on the Fitzroy land claim. Those of you who drive back and forth between Catherine and Kununurra will know Fitzroy. It's on the right-hand side of the road if you're going west, and it's just before you get to the Victoria River Bridge there. Well, the court's view was we're doing this for fairness and natural justice, which is good. But the Indigenous claimants had another view of this, a wider significance, because if you are not alone, then there is always an audience. One's authority to speak is authorized by dreamings, by the ancestors who are in country, by the country itself. And when one speaks, ancestors and country are listening. Other living beings may well be listening. Most assuredly, dreamings are paying attention. And it would not be lawful to speak about matters affecting the country and the group without including all these sentient beings who are themselves living inside of country and are in fact part of this process. The precept, you are not alone, has this corollary then that your life bears witness to the lives of others and your life is witnessed by others. You are a participant. And I think many of us outlaws would tread the earth a bit more differently if we realized or would remember that our actions were being witnessed by others. Okay, I want to go back to the Kamulana siblings from the next path. They speak clearly and eloquently about creation. Creation is part of everything that is, and creation also, of course, has an originary moment. The ancestors or dreamings who made the world and continue to live within it, that's a quote. And creation is for life. A quote again, the gift of law was to show all life how to sustain country. This means that all life is all gift. Creation, like birth, arrives without entitlement. The philosopher Jim Hatley is doing wonderful work on creation and its corollary goodness, working with the Western traditions. And I'm going to say a little bit more about this work later. But he writes that there's simply no autonomous right to be born. There's no autonomous right to be brought into life. The embodied life one lives is only ever a gift. The goodness of creation, Jim says, in his complex analysis of the beginnings of the book of Genesis, the goodness of creation arises as one is called into relationships, as one is called, in fact, to participate in creation. And the gift is always coming. Every moment is a gift, the food we eat, the water we drink, and every breath of life. It's all gift. So country is not ours, as the government says in its literature on caring for our country, as if that were some sort of entitlement. Country is an intergenerational, interspecies gift of life. The gift can't be paid off. That would not only be impossible, but silly even to think of. The gift is cared for and handed on as law. So the gift is respected and cherished. And I probably should be using the plural here because there are so many gifts. I'm not going to go off on a tangent with Derrida here, but his words are helpful up to a point that this gift is not about exchange. It is only ever about responsibility and participation, about celebration and ongoing creation. And with creation, I think we really have to think about trashing the gifts of creation. There is a destruction of life and livelihood. There are extinctions. There is this life in exile from the law. There's participation in a downward cycle of entropy masked as productivity, which I think David was showing us really beautifully in his curious slide yesterday. There's participation in processes, the effects of which ramify and continue for generations. The slow violence, in Rob Nixon's phrase, of environmental damage and of negligence that accumulates into great and terrible effects that harm the planet and harm many, many creatures and will go on for generations, perhaps millennia, and that Tom Van Doren is writing about really eloquently in his forthcoming book, Flightways. It is almost too much to take in, and I think we all recognize this. It's another reason why we need this conversation. My final path brings me back to a story of mutualism. One of the great lawmen of the Victoria River of the Northern Territory was Old Jimmy Mangayari. He spoke about Captain Cook and colonization, as did many of the people who taught me. And one of his questions was why it had all been so hard. Why wasn't mateship offered right from the start? That was what Old Jimmy wanted to know. And I quote, why that Captain Cook never say, oh, come on, mate, you and me live together. You and me living together, mates together, you and me can work for the country all the same then. Well, I'm revisiting his words in the context of the Anthropocene and thinking about how Old Jimmy was transforming the dyad of colonizer and indigenous into a triad that includes country, and it puts country at the heart of it all. And I actually think now that this is the absolute issue of our time, globally, multi-speciesly, and locally, how we may work together for country. Now, when Old Jimmy says that the whole purpose of living together is to work for country, we will hear resonances with Stephen's generalization about keeping things alive in their place. We'll hear resonances with the Kamulana's words that there is still much work to be done before there can be a true and lasting meeting of minds, hearts, and worlds. Working together for country will include working towards meetings of minds, hearts, and worlds. Work means putting our life energy in service of country, and this is big, as I've tried to explain. Together, I think, can also be understood expansively. I don't think the old man meant that every Indigenous person would have to work side by side with a non-Indigenous person and vice versa. He spoke of sharing. You can be part of my place, I can be part of your place. Together, I think, could recognize that our lives are entangled and that we can be sharing purposes while working where we are. And of course, humans ought not to imagine themselves as the only beings working together. There are an absolute ton of issues here, and I'll just mention one that is close to my heart, cities and towns. Not only are humans becoming more urban, but so too are many animals. The reasons are many, and I'm not going to go into them. They're well understood, I think. My question is it possible to reimagine urban and suburban places as kinds of country? I absolutely don't want to trivialize Aboriginal country. I don't know if this is possible. I just want to ask, can we go beyond the idea of natural areas within urban spaces and look more thoughtfully about how a city might be reconfigured if the aim of urban life was to inhabit and care for country? Could city and city dwellers, all of us urban flora and fauna, become part of a story of country? Now I'm going to conclude by leaving the Australia-centered frame and moving away from the expository mode. I want to acknowledge that Indigenous people in other places are also working to get these conversations happening, and so too are many non-Indigenous people. I'm going to offer 3 very brief reflections that address issues that have been implicit in my talk thus far. So first, the conjunction of ontology and epistemology. Second, the problem of witness to inhabitation of legacies of genocide and ecocide, and how those two may in fact be the same, two sides of the same thing. And third, healing. So I'm drawing on writings by people with whom I've been having these kinds of conversations in the U.S. This is not a kind of objectively determined set of people. These are people with whom I've been trying to build bridges from here to there and there to here. So first, Numata Hernandez of the Blackfoot Nation. Her homeland is in Montana. Numata has written that stories are the breath of life. She explains the conjunction between breath, wind, and spirit. Stories are told on the breath. They carry with them the knowledge of the ancestors and the knowledge of the animals and plants and everything in the world, and they breathe the possibility for wisdom into those who listen. The knowledge she's talking about is the knowledge of how to be human. Being human is an achievement, she says. It's not a given. In her words, you can walk around in the body of a human being, but that doesn't make you one. One learns to be human, and one learns through stories. Second, Jim Hatley, who I mentioned earlier. Jim's a non-native guy from Montana. He's been working very closely with Numata. I'm going to share a poem that comes out of a beautiful essay of his called Naming Coyote in Hebrew, a memoir. And I'll put the link to that up. It's available on the web if you want to chase it up. It's a lovely essay. The essay and its embedded prose poems situate him in the midst of genocide and ecocide, bringing them together and putting him in the frame, in that thorny position that in witness to history and in witness to love of life and desire for a different future has to be occupied. So here's part of his prose poem, I Remember Not Remembering Coyote. Dad brought me with him to Hill 57, the hill where for decades Crees and Métis, who had arrived too late to be confined to a reservation, simply built their homes anyway, on stones and dust, beyond the outskirts of Great Falls, overlooking neatly plowed fields, prosperous Norwegian farmers growing wheat and alfalfa. Coyote stories, I suspect, were lurking on Hill 57, but only later did I return there, following a dusty road cutting through thistle and sagebrush on my last summer in Great Falls before going to college. I worked for 1 month for the Census Bureau and was responsible for determining the state of the basements in large sections of rural Cascade County. No one said so, but the basements were obviously of interest if there were ever to be a nuclear war. And so I was asking householders far and wide about the depths of their basements, the walls of their basements, indeed, if they had a basement. And so I found myself on Hill 57, the settlement now almost empty, a few shacks here and there. One man lifted the blanket to his home, invited me in, asked me to sit down. He explained to me carefully why he would not answer my questions, even though his floor was of earth, and even the notion of his having a basement was laughable. I squirmed in my chair. I did not know what to say. Later that day, I ate lunch next to a Minuteman missile silo and read the beginning of James Aggie's A Death in the Family. At no point in that day did I listen for the howling of coyotes, nor did I hear them. It's funny, I almost said dingoes there. And finally, this is a poem by Linda Hogan. She's a poet, novelist, essayist, member of the Chickasaw Nation. Linda and I have given each other a fair bit of mutual support over the years, and for me this is a very special poem. It's called Eucalyptus. It is the first red light of morning, and the others are praying outside with old songs, sage and tobacco, while I have been dreaming from the deep, the ancient, taking in the red light rising between the eucalyptus trees and their fragrance. They drop 3 seeds in the shadows, 3 deep shrines, worlds becoming, I can hold them. And the naked bark, its spare intimacy that peels back and reveals its other layers, deeper, earlier, without effort, that beautiful undoing, the smooth newness. Some of the religions say that the 5 senses are thieves. So let's say I am stolen because my senses are all awake. And like the tree, I can lose myself layer after layer, all the way down to infinity. And that's when the world has eyes and sees. The whole world loves the unlayered human. So, thank you.